a committee, like I just volunteer at the church. It could be a team at work. It could be sitting on a board. It could be a sports team, any of that. How many of you have ever experienced while you're sitting in the meeting with the team and you say, why am I here? Yeah, like, why am I even on here? And how many of you ever said, how soon can I get off of this team? Okay, I have experienced that as well. So I really went down the path of better understanding team dynamics, and I've spent a significant amount of time understanding why teams work the way that they do. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you today about, is how do we get our teams that are at work, or whether they're volunteer or committee. We're going to talk about the two different types of teams and how do we get them really to produce results. So over the next 50 minutes, we're going to talk about that. So the first thing I want to talk about is this awesome story. So imagine, if you will, that you are inside of a very dark cave with no food and no water. Is that a scary thought for somebody that's like claustrophobic? My heart begins to race just thinking about that. And think that you're there with 11 other fellow soccer players and your 25-year-old coach, and you're inside there for 18 days. I was so, well, one, from a research aspect, I'm like researching how this is happening, but just for my own, I have a child, like I couldn't even imagine this happening. So then you think your only hope to get out of here is an international team, a team that people have never worked together, coming from all different backgrounds. They don't even speak the same language, and your life literally depends on this team coming together, figuring out what the rescue mission is going to be, how we're going to play this out, and saving your life. That to me is like, oh my gosh, this is such a perfect example of how teams come together and resolve things very, very quickly. They did this. They found these boys. The really cool part of the story, if you don't know this, is that they actually had this guy that's in the UK. He's an insurance sales or insurance consultant, but he was this explorer, and he had mapped out those very caves. And when he was watching this play out on the news, he was like, wait a minute, you're looking in the wrong place. I've actually mapped those out. He spent 10 years going back and forth between the UK and Thailand, checking out those caves. He gets a hold of the government and says, hey, I've got these divers that really know these caves. You need to have them come over and help you. I think you're looking in the wrong spot. One of the biggest takeaways in my mind is you have to be okay from a leadership perspective. If you're leading a team, that you could say, it's okay, we're going to bring these people on to Thailand, I don't know them, and we're going to trust them that they are an expert, they know what they're doing, and they're going to find them. So when I look at this, not only is it fascinating to me, but I think about the group of people that come together to make this happen, and then the research mind in me starts figuring out, how did this happen? And how do we apply this to what we do today? And it's all gonna come full circle when we get to the very end. So all of you heard that did you know about the British consultant? I was really fascinated by that, but it underscores the importance of saying, I need an expert and I'm okay with it not being me. So what led me down this path to look at into teamwork, team development, how do I get teams to work better together? So how many of you have ever worked with a team, group of people, we don't have to call them a team, group of people, that you're like, they are so awesome. I love this group. Like, if you have ever had that, I had that. And I was and love is probably too strong of a word, but I loved the people I worked with for so many years, and I didn't even want to leave. It really took me a long time. So I'm gonna let you go back in time with me to 2006. This is me, the thinner Lauralee, right there, much thinner Lauralee, but there I am, working with some of the best people I've ever met. And we were together for about 6 years. We did amazing work together. We knew each other so well. I would give you all their names, but most of them all start with a J. And I was like the outlier, me and poor little Eddie, and everybody else was like John, Jenna, Jeff, Joe, they were all J's. We were kind of the outliers. But this team stayed together, the core of it. I worked with them for about 6 years. And I finally left. I'm a career-driven type person, and I usually stay 2 to 3 years, and I'm like, okay, it's time for me to go conquer the next thing. I stayed a little more actually than 6 years, Many of them stayed 8, 9, and 10 years on that same exact team. And I think, wow, could you imagine today how much work we could get done if we're working with people that we really, really know well and that we count on, that are dependable, and we care a lot about as human beings. And then I left that team, and I found out, oh my gosh, I think we were like a unicorn, because now I'm on a lot of dysfunctional teams that can't seem to get anything done. That they revert back to old decisions, or they forget that they even made a decision, or we take 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. I began to sit on boards or be on committees, and my work evolved, and I'll talk more about the types of teams that they are. But I found out that this team was like, I began to think that this was like a complete unicorn. It will never, ever happen again. And that drove me to, I really want to research and understand, why was this team so special? And I'm going to share that with you today. And then we're going to get to, at the very end, we're going to give you some actionable items that you can take away and deploy immediately. So what did I learn? There are 2 types of teams, and I've actually described them already to you. The first one is your traditional team. So think of this as like your sports teams. You think, okay, they're stable, they're bound together, they have a very common goal. But the great thing about them is they practice day after day after day. And when I think about my team, we were together for years. I knew Joe so well. I knew I could call him at 11 o'clock at night. I knew what his strengths were. I knew what his weaknesses were. I knew where he could help. I knew what I could call on Jenna for. We had worked together for so long. We knew each other really, really well. This is our normal, what we think of a team. What I found, though, when I left, is this is not how a lot of teams work today. So though we were a stable team and we had worked on many projects together, when I left, I discovered the majority of the work that I've done for the last 8 years is all different people at different points on different projects, and they're rotating around. And so I started to study this woman named Amy Edmondson. And she looked at what they call teaming. It's a really good TED Talk if you've read it, but she's got some really good books around this too. And I thought of the word flex teams, like when I was trying to figure out why is my team so good and why am I struggling with some of these other teams that I've been on. Is it just that Joe was an awesome manager? And he was an awesome manager. But it wasn't just that, it was that we do teamwork on the fly. We come together very, very quickly. You come from different professional backgrounds where we were all kind of similar in what we had done. A lot of us had a lot of learning and development background, a lot of training and facilitating. So we were all very similar souls. The teams I work on today, they come from legal, they came from risk, they came from leadership, they were CEOs, they were administrative people, they were project managers, all walks of life, all different types, and we have to solve a particular problem. A lot of times it could be a compliance-related problem that we had to do in less than 90 days. We had to solve something that maybe the government is looking for us to do. And I kept failing and failing and trying to figure out, why is this happening? So when I got into the research of it, and I was saying like flex teams, Amy named them teaming. And she basically says that coordinating and collaborating with people across all boundaries across boundaries of all kinds to get work done. Think of the cave example. That is a classic example of teaming, what she would call teaming, what I call flex teams. The picture that you see up there, that's actually the Chilean miners. So they were there in 2010. Stuck in the mine for 66 days. People came from all over the world with different backgrounds, different expertise to come and drill into the side of that and get those people out. Today, for me, I had a conference call last week with somebody in Brazil. I have people that contract with me that live in India and the Philippines. In my work that I do with clients, I could be working with legal or Recor or all different types of people, and we band together quickly, and then we disband and we go do something else. So how can we bring some of the things that we know are successful with a standard team or a traditional team to a flex team? So how many of you have experienced this where you're together really quick with people you've never worked with before? Like, okay, yeah. And a matter of fact, I just got an email, last week that says, hey, you're on a committee, we need you to come and help. People that I have not worked with in a team environment before. We're starting from scratch, we're learning how to work together. So some of the things that are requirements for teams. So what do you have to be successful? How many of you have heard of the Marshmallow Challenge? Okay, so if you've ever been to Richmond social media that Ashley and I do every Friday, I am the person that comes up with all the little breakout sessions. Most of the time, we brainstorm together, but I'm usually the one that's driving the activity that tables do. And I do that, one, so that they work together, they can apply the learning, but two, I'm also observing how that team comes together to solve whatever we ask them to solve. And I'm really watching and saying, how did that group come together? How did they have a conversation? Especially the tables that have never worked together. So at Richmond Social Media, a lot of people come and they all sit together because they've been coming month after month. But sometimes we get tables that have never worked together. I'm really watching them to see how do they do this, whatever the activity is. The marshmallow challenge is pretty cool, and I almost brought it today. And I was like, no, don't have them do something to work together as a team. So you would almost had spaghetti on your table. But the marshmallow challenge is really cool. And there's some cool learnings that come out of it. The first thing is that a guy named Peter Skillman brought this out, I think, back in 2006. And he basically said, you get 18 minutes, you get 20 sticks of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, 1 marshmallow. And the idea is that you have to construct something, and the marshmallow must be at the top. So you have 18 minutes with people you don't know to construct something, and the marshmallow must be at the top. That's kind of the end result of it. So this next guy, he's like, that's a really cool concept. So this other guy that does research, he says, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to go out and do a bunch of workshops all over the world. And I'm going to put kids all the way up to CEOs of Fortune 100 companies. He gets them into just like rooms just like this with tables just like that, puts down the spaghetti and watches to see what happens. They observe and write research papers on it. So what did he find? Most groups all run the exact same way, and this is very traditional of team. So the first thing is orient. What does that mean? Like, any guess? Orient? Who are you? What's your name? What's your name?
Phil.
Phil, I'm Lauralee. We're going to work together on that.
We just
spaghetti.
got orientated.
We just got orientated. Yep, now I know. So that's the first step. Very, very normal. Then they go into the planning phase, like, okay, what's our task? We see it all the time with RSM. I'm going to read my instructions. Okay, I understand my tools. I know what I need to do. Then they begin to build. And then he found in the research, okay, 18 minutes later, they are like this. And I love if you watch the video on it. It's so cute. He's like, ta-da, look, it's beautiful. Look, this is awesome. And then what happens? Ta-da goes to uh-oh, and it begins to collapse and fall. He's done this over and over again. And why does it collapse and fall toward the end? For the biggest part of the groups. So, of course, he provides research on this, and I just love this answer. So who does it best? Oh, has anybody seen this before? You have, okay. Do you know what the results are? Okay, great. This is kind of funny, isn't it? Yeah. I know, I was kind of surprised. So at the end, who does the worst? Business students and lawyers. And I kind of sort of was like a little bit offended, and then I was like, no, wait a minute. I'm not an MBA, so I'm going to say that I'm not a student because I don't have my MBA. So then I was like, maybe I would be further down. Then we have our lawyers, but who did one of the best? Thank goodness, he always says, architects and the engineers did, well, that's good because they're out building houses, so that's really good. But kindergartners. Kindergartners outperformed these two as well as CEOs. And when did the CEOs get really good? They had to have their admins. Without their admins, they didn't do very well. And I loved that response. So I'm like, why? Tell me, I want to know, why did the kindergartners do really well? And how can I incorporate that into my team? So I want to share with you why they do really well. One of the things is that they kept the marshmallow at the center of what they were working on. And by that I mean, the other groups were so focused on building it, they forgot about the center. Who am I actually doing this for? The marshmallow. So with kindergartners, what they did is two things. They kept that, and they also did prototypes. So they built something kind of small, put the marshmallow on top. Okay, yeah, the weight will hold that. Then they built something else a little bit bigger, put the marshmallow on top. Oh yeah, okay, we're doing okay. Built something a little bit bigger, add the marshmallow on top. What we see traditionally with teams is that they wait until it's perfect and all the way at the very end, and then they want to deliver the product instead of delivering things as they go. The other thing, so we call that prototyping and testing. So the two big takeaways for me is I think about the teams that I'm part of. Do we forget about our customer, could be, or if I'm in a hospital, the patient, we have to remember who's really at the center of whatever we're trying to solve for. And the kindergartners did a really good job of that, and they didn't get into the minutia of everything else. So if you own a business, you may be thinking, or you manage a team, who is at the heart of whatever I'm trying to solve for? What is that main pivotal thing? And not lose sight of that as you go. And the other piece is to test, 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 try different things. What we call now agile, if you know anything about project management, we've kind of swung from wait until it's perfect and push it out to now with a lot of software and other projects, we're like test, 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 and then push it. So let's go back to our cave example and understand what did they do here. So they did exactly what we just demonstrated with the teaming, and that's I'm going to keep testing, 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 and the marshmallow exercise, and keeping the marshmallow at the center, which is really the kids. They're the ones they focused on. So the ideas were coming from everywhere. I love this third one. But basically they said, we could have pipes, like they could, and even my husband, God love my opposite of me husband, is like, you know what I would do? I would do blah, blah, blah. You know, I'd have a string and like a pipe and I'd float them along. And I'm like, okay, well, throw out your idea there, honey. But other people are coming out with that too. They also said like floating body bags, or Elon Musk, I love this. He was like, I'm gonna build a kid-sized mini sub. I don't know how fast, but if we're going on Tesla and how they build, I don't think they had that much time. So the options really came down to three. We're gonna drill, which is what they did in the Chilean miners, or we're gonna dive, which is ultimately what they did, or we're gonna wait, and that means wait out all of the rain. So when I look at that, like when I see that, that's 2.5 miles in. I'm thinking, that is so, to me, it just blows my mind that these complete strangers came together and did this. And I think I worked with people that I know that took 3 years to write guidelines and policy procedure. I'm like, what were we doing wrong? It just amazes me. Luckily, most of us don't have life and death situations. But what did they do to prepare for this? They did a lot of testing, just like what we talked about. So they remembered, one, that the boys were in there and that they cannot swim, and that they would likely start to have anxiety going through there. So they provided anxiety medication to them, and then they tested in pools. They wrapped them up and started, they have this, like, it looks like a taco almost. And in pools, they would practice how they're going to pull these kids through this string all the way out the 2.5 miles. They'd bring them up every 45 minutes to check them, make sure they're doing okay. I thought that was so, I mean, in the amount of time that they did this is very short. We're talking less than 3 weeks. Amazing. So now let's take a look at the last piece of research. Google, how many of you have seen the Google's team research before? Okay, you must be my reader over here, Roxy. I am too. I'm a reader to an extreme. So I think this is one of the things I look at when I think about some of the research I personally have done and conducted in my work life. And I validate, I align with many of the things that they discovered. The first one was psychological safety. When they rolled this out, I think that's a really fancy word for basically saying it's okay to have a voice. Now, from a leadership perspective, whether you're leading a team or you're part of a team, that is an underlying cultural current. And what that simply says is you have to be okay that people are voicing their opinion, because that's how the best answers come out. They put a very fancy term on it, psychological safety, but I look at it like every person has a voice. They have to be okay with saying that. That's much easier to say than be okay with. So I was on this team. I was leading this team for this little project, and I had my finance guy, and he kept trying to voice his concern, and I had a CEO pushing back, basically saying, I think that we don't need to worry about this fiscally, whatever. And he came to me and said, I don't feel like I have a voice. I have serious concerns. Now, leading the team, even though the CEO's on there, he's a subject matter expert. He's not responsible. I'm ultimately accountable for this. I had to give him that voice in a room where there's very strong personalities with leadership and allow him to bubble up those concerns. And ultimately, his concern was right, and we had to change what the product was that we were working on and the deliverables because of those changes. So when we look at that psychological safety, every person in this room, if you're on a team, you're building that culture and saying, I'm gonna pause and allow that person to say what they have to say. That's part of, we have to build that culture, not look just to the leadership team. The second thing that they picked up on was dependability, that they have to be dependable. Well, that too is culture. I, as somebody on the team, if I don't answer my phone, or I cancel my conference calls, or I don't take the notes, and I don't tell people I'm going to do it, or I say I'm going to get something done on Friday and I actually turn it in next Thursday, and I am a final hour performer in all disclosure, but it shows up on Friday if I promise it on Friday at 4:59, but it is there. You have to be dependable, and you, as somebody on that team, you really set that. The third piece that they discovered is structure and clarity, and we're going to talk about more on understanding who does what. Then the last two things I think are inherent of human beings, whether you're on a team or you're just by yourself in a solo working. People want to know that there's meaningful, that the work is meaningful, that you're not just doing it to just do it, and that there's an impact, that I feel like I'm making an impact to the organization. So that brings me to what I put together and kind of how I believe that we can reach peak performance. Based on all the research I've done and 20 years of working on teams collectively, this is how I set up every team that I'm going to lead. And I do my best to influence. If I'm just going to be part of the team, I try to influence how this goes by being and including these things. So the first thing is a cross-functional team. And I don't want to say that that's diversity, because people get a little hung up on the diversity side. Cross-functional means that I'm okay to have experts join the team that are smarter than me, that have a different background, that have a different personality. And there are really simple personality tests. You can simply ask them. I'm notorious for asking, are you like a detail-oriented person? Help me understand how you do that. And then I'm like, and I am not. So I really like you because you're the kind of person that will make sure I don't miss any of the details. Balancing out my personality. Making sure that you have a cross-functional team. Without this, everything that we're going to talk about above it is all going to collapse. The second thing is the why. So we all raised our hand and said, or many of us, I won't say all of us raised our hand that we've been on a team. Many of us raised our hand and said, I don't understand why I'm on this team. So establishing the why behind what why are we all gathered here? What is expected? Those are the things that starts the conversation off. Establishing the why so that there's no confusion. So if you send out an email that says, hey, Lauralee, I'd like you to join this committee, and tell me right off the bat, why? Why are we getting together? What do we want the purpose to be? The second thing is establishing who. So when you think about the two different teams, my old team was the traditional team. What a lot of us, if we worked for a long period of time, maybe used to seeing, that's our sports teams. We know each other really well, but don't assume that that should stop. So when I worked for my awesome superstar team, and then I left, and then I had a lot of really bad experiences, I finally made it back to a really good team. And one of the things that she did that I thought was so hokey when I very first started working with her years ago is that we had to include in every face-to-face meeting a personal story, like a personal journey. And at first I was like, okay, I really don't know these people. I really don't want to tell them. So I started with something soft like, this is my dog. She's the center of my world. This is my family. They're okay, but the dog's awesome. So you start with, just simple things. Over all the years that I worked for her, we did that every quarter, come together, and we always started with that. Even though over time we began to know each other, we always began with that build trust. What does knowing each other bring to the table? Like, why is that so important? That's a question to you all.
It gives some wiggle room when there's a challenge that arises.
Exactly, right? If you know me and you're expecting something from me, I am less likely to let you down, right? If I say, oh my gosh, I feel so, if I don't really know you, I'm like, I don't know that dude, so he'll be okay. That thing I told him I was getting on Friday, you're getting it on like Tuesday of next week because I really don't know you. It immediately changes the dynamics if the people you work for, the people you work with, the team that you're on, the committee that you're on, the church committee, whatever it is, the more you can build that trust and know, the better off you're going to be. All right, the next thing is to clarify the what. So what do we've got I understand why I'm here, I understand the who, then we get into, okay, what am I doing? What are we going to do? This begins for me, and the when I ran projects, is really for me to begin to lay out the project plan. And in the very beginning, when I didn't know, and this is like, 10, 11 years ago, I was like, Lauralee knows that. Don't worry about it, I'll just write that. The older, smarter, failed many times Lauralee discovered that the group has to kind of weigh in on that what. They have to kind of tell me, they understand each other, they understand why we're here. We begin to bubble up together what we think that goal clarity should look like. What do we think the goal? That way they begin to buy in. So historically, I've always said, I've got the solution because I'm the one that's on the hook for this. Over years, I figured out, no, they really have the solution. I'm just here to make sure that those answers come up and I get documented, and then we validate them and try them. So then we get to the how. So we have to gain agreement. And I would say that this is missed more often than not in the boards that I've worked with, is that we don't gain alignment on how we're going to do something. One group will go do something, or this person will go do something, and we don't come together to say, we agree to how we're going to tackle this problem. And when we don't do that, this is where the sidebar conversations start to take place. I don't feel like I have a voice, so go back to the psychological safety. I don't feel like I can say what I really feel. Now I don't get to weigh in because on the how, and you're expecting me to carry the work. This is where you begin to see disengagement. Even if they say, yeah, I know you, I really like you, but I didn't agree on how we're going to accomplish this. And they stop showing up to meetings. They become very disengaged. They are late to the calls, and they kind of mentally check out and say, I wasn't on board with that. You're forcing me to do that. So I speak from experience, having done that very thing, say, okay, I think I've got how we're going to do it. Instead, it becomes a role reversal to, how do you think we should do that? How do you envision? And allowing that safety net that everybody can offer their opinion. Does that make sense to you? Good? All right. The last piece we get into is the implementation and the whole test thing. So this is who is doing what, when, and how. It all comes together in implementation. This is where you get role clarity. So I was on a team. This is a funny story, but I gotta be careful how because it didn't happen at work. It happened on like a personal level. So I'm part of this little committee, and we have this thing that we're gonna do. And I have this group of people working with me. And I said, okay, I'll like host the meetings, I'll gather notes, I'll do all this. And then we all kind of went around, was like, we gained agreement on who was doing what. Now, this is the how, we've already said, okay, what we think, we put all that up. And then we're like, okay, how we think we're gonna get the work done. And now we're at the implementation, like who's gonna raise their hand and say that they're gonna do this. And I had this one little member who kept worrying very much about how everybody else was doing it, and like, well, I'm gonna go take care of the finance thing. I'm like, help me understand why you wanna contribute to the finance side of it when we've got somebody that's managing the finance. This is a team of like 6 people. I mean, it's not a huge team. And they continue to encroach on their role and say, this is what I want to do. I want to go do this. And so in that situation, what do you do? Like if you ran into this person that's like, I'm gonna help this person, and I'm gonna go over and do this person, and then I'm gonna go do this job. What would you do in that situation? Validate, and my psychologist over here. How would you validate, Dion? How do you validate?
Validate their effort and their ideas and plans or whatever else they want to contribute.
And then how do you turn them from stop worrying about what the finance guy's doing and the marketing person's doing and all this, and just do the things that you agreed to? How do you turn them around?
Offer communication with the other person probably.
That's a good one. Yep. Can you go talk to the finance guy and help me understand? You raised your hand.
I'd probably build them up on why what they promised they'd work on is so important to the group. So kind of build that.
That goes back to the validation, right? Validating. So.
The importance of
Exactly. You hit on it exactly. Like, how do they know that the work that I'm doing, it goes back to just what we talked about. What I'm doing is meaningful. Is it making an impact? Because if I'm not the rock star role, and I feel like the finance guy that's actually going out and getting money, that's the rock star role, I want to go over and do that. So that conversation this goes back to, I can be really transparent. I can be really honest with you and say, hey, David, this guy's not named David. I just made that name up. Hey, David, like, your role is really important, and this is why it's important, and this is what I need from you. Can you deliver on that? Do you think it's important? And the minute they say, I don't think it's important, halt. Do not try to convince them otherwise. It's okay. Where do you think that you fit in, David? And then in your mind, I got a gap. I need to fill this gap. I've seen too many leaders go down the path of, David, I know you don't think this is important, and I know you think this sucks, but I really need you to do this. The engagement's already gone. If he doesn't validate that I think this is important, he's done, he's finished. Check it off, you've got a gap, now it's your responsibility to fill the gap. So that's what you're happening, you're making sure you've got all of these layers and who's doing what, and you're testing them along the way, what we call agile, which is I'm going to test this prototype, but they do it a lot in software, but we can do it in any project. Try to stand something up like the kindergartners did with the spaghetti. I'm going to test and not lose sight of my marshmallow, test it along the way. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Like when you get to the implementation though, can't you get to a point where you're like, oh man, maybe I got the wrong person on my team here?
That can happen.
Like, do you play out the roles when you're planning?
Oh, absolutely.
Recruiting or whatever.
Don't worry,
however
your team
works.
just talks about you behind your back.
Oh, is that?
Talk about you all.
Your team just talks about, we know who's really should be doing what. That goes back to, in your foresight, my cross-functional team. And as you move along, if you find, because remember.
Like, are you like filling roles mentally before you're even talking to people?
Yes. So I'll play one out for you really clear.
Right.
I'll give you an example. So I had a compliance project. Lauralee's not meant to do compliance projects, but I had them for a long time. And so this one has to do with what we call RESPA, so don't worry about what that is, but that has to do with, you know, lenders and realtors. But this was very high intense project. Senior leaders were looking at it. So as I began to build out and say, okay, I need this cross-functional team to solve this particular problem, I began to look at who do I need that are experts. The first thing I thought about is outside external. I need an attorney. The attorney may not be my best friend, and I can assure you she was not. She was my favorite person to say no, but she was looking from a very risk adverse, and she was an expert, not at anything, at RESPA. I needed her to know and understand the law. That's what I needed her to do. If she didn't know other things, that was okay, but she had to be able to interpret it. So I got my outside, then I got my inside. Who's that? I need a risk person internally that understands the process. But they can't just be any risk person. They have to understand RESPA, and they have to understand the risk that's associated with sales in doing that. So you're beginning to, just like that, fill out who do I know he brings to the table. The same way when you're on a committee, you're thinking, whether it's nonprofit or whatever, whatever I'm trying to accomplish, who's the best people to do that? Who's good at details? Who's not good at details? And if it doesn't work out, I had a team on a totally different project and non-work related. I had a team that we had like 7 people. 50% of them dropped out on me. Resource reasons, whatever. I'm like running around asking other people, hey, you're really good at this. You're good at the creative side. Will you come and help me? Will you join me? We got to completion. We got it launched with 50% of the team that we started with. And it was okay. It still worked out perfectly. They picked up where the others left off. What is bad is trying to hobble along by yourself when you lose 50% and you're like, nope, I got it. I'll just keep doing that.
And you're throwing 3 different hats on.
Yep. That's where you're like, whoa, time out. I can't do it. Yes?
How do you mediate between 2 people who love saying no to each other? 2 type B personalities.
Communication. Thank you. It was like you were a plant. So understanding, one, this goes back to, is it a safe environment? So that's a culture current, right? Underneath everything. You're in an environment where you don't feel safe and you can't have a courageous conversation, it's very difficult. As somebody that's on the team or leading the team, you're contributing to the culture. So if that's, I want to have a sidebar with Andrew and we're going to talk about Andrew's issue, and then I'm going to have a sidebar over here, and then I feel like they can come together and talk about why they're resisting. Why is there a challenge? But that undercurrent of open communication has to be there. If you shut them down, which I have witnessed it, literally witnessed it both face-to-face and in person, where they shut them down, they're disengaged right off the bat, done, they won't say anything else. And they don't contribute, they don't help, and now you've got dead weight coming along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I'm thinking is, let's say someone talks to you and you tell the other person, oh, he has this concern, then they kind of think, oh, he's going behind my back and talking to my supervisor about that. And you have a situation that's kind of a problem. Then after, I mean, it's worse after that, after the conversation.
If you are not leading the team and you're a member of the team, you can make a recommendation, come together. If you're leading the team, and ultimately you get to decide how you want to handle it, because it comes down to transparency. I have a conversation with one, I have a conversation with the other. Looks like we're kind of different on opinion, Tammy. Emma, kind of difference of opinion. Let's come together and talk about it. Not talk about each other's opinion, they need to talk about that together, but gaining agreement that they're okay to take down the barriers and come together. Does that make sense? And I throw that out to the group. Have you had this happen before where one's like no and the other one's no and they're not talking? What are some things you've done that have been successful?
I think you just nailed it with mediating.
Mediating, and he said, but on his side, he's like, I'm concerned like getting in the middle, right? Is that your concern?
I am not, kind of, yes. I'm worried about if you get in the middle, then because you are in a role that's obviously higher, you're the supervisor.
Not necessarily higher. You could be a team leader, but we're all peers. You're not, leading just means I'm ultimately responsible, that's all. Like I'm getting all of us together, is what that means.
I'm talking about a situation where a hierarchy exists.
Oh, hierarchy exists. Okay, got it.
So what do you do? Like, let's say you have a base of a pyramid, and then you have a top of the pyramid. And do you go like this, or do you go like this?
Okay, for those of you who are on this side of the room, I want to demonstrate what he did. So he said, I have a pyramid, the leader's at the top. Do you go like this, up through the leader and back down, or do you go across the bottom, right? So the two folks that are at the bottom, do they come together? So I'm gonna, before I weigh in on that, I want to throw that out to the group and say, what do you guys think? How would you handle that? From a communication standpoint, we got friction in the team. How do we handle
I'll try
it?
to keep it on the same tier initially.
Keep it on the same tier, so he would not do the U, he would go across the bottom. Okay, who else?
I think it depends what some of the other dynamics that play at the moment are.
Other dynamics, so don't know exactly if I would involve the leader or if I would work, because I'm not exactly sure what the entire situation is. Okay, situation assessment, I like that. All right, what else? Michael, did you have a comment? Because I saw you like started, so I'm throwing it out there. Did you have a comment? Do you want to weigh in?
We talked about students and something, and I did a simulation with the Harvard Business School regarding those type of hierarchy decisions. And in reality, when you mediate, you have to go horizontal, but you also can include the CEO in the mediation. You have to do both in order to get a result-driven clarification of the response of how to get it solved. So, I mean,
So you're doing you're saying we need to loop in all parties,
yes.
But in your research, what you did, transparency's like you have to be honest and open.
Yes. You have to do horizontal first with your team, and then it's almost, instead of a U, it's almost like a.
Oh no, we were doing upside down U. You're right, it is a U.
So,
Does that help?
Yes, that actually does. I mean, or else you have a silo effect. So, yeah, I can see that.
That was a good question. That challenged us all. I like it. I like it a lot.
Can I steal a question from you? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Kind of to his, but a little bit different than his. So mine's a real situation, so I don't want to say any names. But I'm on multiple boards and teams. What would you suggest in a environment where, say it's a board, where a lot of the members of the board may not completely agree with the person in charge? How do you agree with that? How do you work that kind of thing?
So I don't feel like this is a hot seat at all. No, not at all. Okay, so that's it. No, that's a good question, because at the end of the day, it's a team, right? So the team has to decide. Where you have the challenge with that particular example, in my opinion, is that you don't have that psychological safety. You don't have where we feel like we can have a voice, and that leader would be okay with that. So what happens is you get sidebar conversations, and this happens whether it's a nonprofit board, a work team board, doing in an organization, whatever. It happens the same. I don't feel like I have a voice, so the group, and it happens often, Andrew, they come together, and let's say 4 members come together and like, you know what, we really don't like so-and-so. They're just not very good. We want to get rid of them. That person may not even be aware of it. They don't even know that you're either unhappy or you don't like their leadership decisions. So 2 things could be at play. 1, they're not open and honest. Or 2, do you remember when I was talking about the mistakes I've made in the past where I determine the how or the what, and I just assume my people will come along with me? That could be a leadership challenge that they may be having. I'm making these decisions and I assume that all of my board will be okay with it. That is going back to the board and saying we all have to be open and honest. We have to have an open, honest conversation and say, the way that we perceive is that these decisions are being made, we're not aware of it, and we're struggling with that leadership style. Now, this is when this comes into play. Do they have enough self-awareness and they have enough high emotional intelligence to say, I understand your concern, Andrew. I might have screwed up. Not everybody's going to respond that way. Some people are going to be like, really? Well, you don't like my board, you can head for the door. You don't want to be on that board to begin with then. But if it's a good leader, they're going to say, thank you for one, being transparent, open, and honest. Two, I did make some decisions and I didn't gain agreement. I just made the decision. Three, how can I improve? If you are not communicating and there is no self-awareness, you're going to have a challenge. That's the reality, as much as I wish that it would work perfectly. Has anybody else had that experience, whether it's a board or something else? Yeah.
Everybody has.
Andrew's not old enough to know the future of all these challenges you're going to have. But if you're at any length of time,
The cuss word's real.
you will see as you go. But what you're doing that I did not do at your age is that you're sitting and listening to this conversation, which means that you're part of a culture that's going to be open and honest and have self-awareness and be okay to get that feedback. Does that make sense? So in itself, even if that's not the right board, you now know this is how a team should be working. This is how they should, and if they're not, I can't influence it. Maybe it's not the right team for me. Does that make sense? Okay, and I've been on a lot of teams just like that. That's when I began to question whether, did I find a unicorn? But what I found was, it wasn't a unicorn. It was I had a really good leader. We were allowed to be open and honest. We never missed the core, our marshmallow. We understood that. We were okay to fail. We would test and try things, and it was okay if they didn't work out. We were in a very safe environment, so we were never attacked. We never knew why we were doing it or how we were going to do it. Those were all conversations we had. So it wasn't a unicorn. It was a team that worked the way it was supposed to. And it took me years to be able to deploy these same tactics and actually get teams to deliver on certain things. So that's how we get to high performance at the very end. So what questions do you have? We have just a couple minutes left. Though I'm almost not sure I want to ask that because you guys have asked very tough questions. Go ahead.
Lauralee, I mean, looking at this top model, when you look at the cross-functional team, would you say clarifies probably the most important part of the piece, or?
This is your goal yes. So goal clarification is, what do we want this to look like at the end? Even if it doesn't look like that at the very end, so even if it kind of changes okay, let me rephrase. So with the cave scenario, the goal was very obvious. We want the boys to get out alive. That is the what, right? Like, we're really clear on that. In real life and in work life, sometimes the goal, we think that that's what it's going to look like, but then as we go through, it doesn't quite get there. That's not the point. The point is when we back up and we clarify at the beginning that everybody's in agreement of what this is going to look like at the end. Even if it changes what the final product looks like, that's okay. We gained agreement, and we are gaining agreement as we go. Does that make sense? So yes, I think that's the most important. I think this, and then you get into the implementation is really, think of an orchestra, right? So everybody's playing their separate part, and you don't want the clarinet guy over there trying to do the saxophone. We need the clarinet guy just to do the clarinet. Make sense? What other questions do you have? Concerns?
I have a thought.
Sure, share.
To see if I'm on the right track.
Sure.
Without the communication or the self-awareness on the leadership side, are you just treading water? It seems like you're probably not getting much work done.
Yes, so not even on the leadership side. So communication, right. So it's not even that. It's not just on the leadership, but in general. So if you don't feel like you're communicating on a regular basis, so if you go radio silent, as I like to call,
right.
Or if you let's put it in real work perspective. If you go and you make a decision, happens a lot, or raise your hand if this has happened to you. You make a decision, nobody documented it, but you know in your head the decision was made. 4 weeks later, they're trying to reel back in that decision and remake it again. That goes to communication. We gained agreement, but nobody communicated, nobody followed, we didn't write it down, we didn't communicate it and say, this is a decision that's made. They try to circle back. So when you say communication, that looks like a lot of different ways. That would be me being transparent and honest, but it's also making sure that meeting notes go out in real life. Communication for the cave is people that are going in there, the divers, they're radioing back and saying, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're experiencing. That communication's different, but at the end of the day, we're talking about what we're doing and we're documenting in real life, real work. We are documenting those things as they go. So having some kind of process to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, what other questions? Okay. I want to be sure that I say, do work that matters and always be transparent. Those are the final two things. At the end of the day, do the work that matters because people know when it doesn't. And thank you. Thank you for having me. We are done 4 minutes early. Thank you for your really tough and engaging questions. I greatly appreciate that. And we're done.
Well, thank you, Lauralee.